Now for the different view of problems, another different view of problems we are talking about here, I would like to invite the next speaker, who will present his comments based on experiences in working with issues in his own divided city of Belfast. Our guest is a former Democratic Union Party politician in Northern Ireland. Nowadays he's a community regeneration facilitator with extensive experience of working at local and area-wide level and with a wide range of groups. He's one of the founding members of East Belfast Interface and is involved in cross-community mediation and conflict resolution in the city. I think it's crucial that we mutually make use of those sources and experiences and knowledge in solving similar problems. For this reason, I encourage you to pay attention to what we are going to hear now from our next speaker. Please welcome Mr. Sammy Douglas.
First of all, just thank Mary for an excellent paper. She sent it to me before the conference, and I read it extensively. So well done. I don't think I have much room here. I suppose that introduction was very much about me and I suppose my political background. But for many years, I was a community activist until some of my friends said I went over to the dark side. I got into politics. But I want to speak as someone who comes from the Protestant Unionist tradition and that pro-British background. I will be mentioning some of my competitors and some of my political opposition, not in a party political way, but just to explain some of the rationale of what I'm going to speak about. And I must say, I've been in Jerusalem for a couple of days, and I did the bike tour, and I also walked around the city. And what I would say is what a wonderful city this is. It's okay? Well done. Thank you so much. And in the presentation, Namati's presentation, we talk about building visions for the future. And for a moment, I want to concentrate on the word vision, in a sense. And at the beginning of our peace process, I remember being involved with a number of what I would call key influencers. And I quoted from one of the Proverbs, and it said, "Where the people have no vision, there the people perish." Where the people don't have vision, they deteriorate, they're demised, in a sense, that they die off. And I would honestly say that in our peace process, if we hadn't had the people with that sense of vision, and I'm talking about politicians, about church leaders, about armed groups, leaders from the armed groups, about civil society, about international help from other countries, and those people taking risks for peace, we wouldn't have had a peace process. And I'm delighted to be at this conference. I feel honoured to be at the conference because for me this helps to rebuild the vision that we have. It's so easy to lose a vision, but it's great to see so many people with the same mentality, the same sense of wanting to do good for your communities in that sense. And there are some similarities from your presentation, Nate, but also some exceptions in terms of Belfast. In terms of Belfast, we're not fighting over a city because it's a holy site or whatever, unlike here. And it was very much about identity, my British identity, others' Irish identity, and that. But I want to make a couple of observations as an outsider, so forgive me if I get it wrong. After I read the paper, I decided to go on that cycle tour. I think it's called Tahana Junction. It's about 3 or 4 kilometres. And as I cycled along there, and as I did a tour yesterday, a few things struck me about Jerusalem from what I have seen, my limited knowledge. First of all, as you rightly point out, the lack of infrastructure, very poor housing, the segregation, the problems with sanitation, poverty and deprivation. And yet it struck me that cycling along there and seeing those areas, those were the Palestinian areas where many of the problems. So that was the first thing. Last year in Belfast, and Alban McGuinness is here and some others, we introduced a new transportation scheme. It's called the Glider, and it's a bus. It's a fancy bus, but it takes people from my area, which is 90% Protestant Unionist, through to West Belfast, which would be 95% Catholic and Republican Nationalist. For the first time ever, we had links. So if I go to hospital in West Belfast, I'm like in the taxi in Hayden, I go on a bus, and vice versa. People are coming back. And one of the things we've done as well is that we've had musicians on the bus, and we've brought people. Use your cyclists, let's come from West Belfast, let's us show you our new community greenway, the Conswater Community Greenway, 10 kilometres of cycle tracks, walking, etc. And for me, that's been a huge success. A very small initiative, expensive, but it's been a huge success. Record numbers of people actually using transportation instead of going. It's also a green issue in terms of using their cars as well. The other thing I would say as well, in terms of our whole police and justice situation, I think most people, if you've looked at Northern Ireland, you'll see the Good Friday Agreement and recognise that there are major problems that we had to deal with, just the way you're dealing with some of those very severe, sometimes I look at it, maybe intractable problems. And I lived in Belfast all my life, and there were many times I felt, we will never solve this. I will never see peace in my lifetime. And we still have that peace process. But policing was one of the biggest issues, and that's one of the issues, those three issues, was a huge issue, a huge challenge for us, because the policing was very much about a police force. I think you'd mentioned the RUC, which is Royal Ulster Constabulary, and the name Royal in itself was about linking to Britain, the royal family as well.
And Ulster, right?
Yeah, and Ulster was very much a unionist Protestant. Oh, this boy knows his stuff, all right. Do you want to come up here and talk? But seriously, and so we had to make major changes. Also, the religious makeup of the RUC, the police, was 90% Protestant. Had been for 50 odd years. So we got a man called Patton, who you may have heard of, Chris Patton, who was also involved in the administration of handing Hong Kong over to the Chinese. We realised a great job he did there. Anyway, so we had to look at the whole aspect of the police force. But things like the name, RUC, the dress, which was black, but also Patton introduced what was called 50-50 policing. And what that meant, every time there were interviews, 50% of those recruits would be Catholic, 50% would be Protestant. And it was, in a sense, it was to encourage Catholics to join this new police force. And be honest, when you talk to any of our people from Northern Ireland here, would say, and I would agree, this is one of the biggest successes of our peace process, without a doubt. A recent survey showed that 84% of people, now you think, come back to the past, you said about RUC, that they weren't accepted, and nearly 50% of Northern Ireland in terms of Catholic areas. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but we're unacceptable, generally speaking, to the nationalist community. And a recent survey showed that 84% of people believe that the new organisation, it's not the RUC, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, believe that Catholics and Protestants are treated equally. That's a huge endorsement of our peace process, huge endorsement of the police. And also, I would also mention as well, just by the way, we have a new project set up in Belfast, new maybe 3 or 4 years, and it's called Police and Community Safety Partnership. It's the municipality of Belfast, and it's initiated by our local councillors, some who were ex-combatants, who were involved in a conflict, ex-combatants, politicians who were ex-combatants, the police, and also civic society. And what they do as well is that they look at issues such as the crime and the vandalism and all the issues dealing at a local level. And they can actually give out grants. The council give money to give out to local groups. So maybe that group that you're involved in, they maybe get, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 shekels for a piece of work, or to bring people together, or to address some of those issues. So what I would say to you is that that's an initiative you should maybe have a look at, police and community safety partnership. But I think you had made the point. Some of those people on that panel would not have recognised the police. The organisation Sinn Féin would not have recognised the Irish government in the past. They have changed. They're now sitting on that, even though it was difficult at the start, but they're doing really well. In fact, I was in the Northern Ireland Assembly until 2017, and I said it somewhere earlier on, our local municipality worked far better than we did, probably delivered more than we did as an assembly for the whole of Northern Ireland. Let me just go on now to what we call the policing board. And again, this was part of the Good Friday Agreement. We realised that the police had to be accountable. One of the biggest difficulties throughout the Troubles, as I said, was police accountability. And we recognised we had to set up not a police body to look after themselves, but an independent body. So we set up the policing board in Northern Ireland, which I was a member of. In 2007, it was set up in 2001. Sinn Féin didn't join until 2007. It was an historic move because it took up seats. Sinn Féin took up seats after agreeing to support civic policing. And Sinn Féin was associated with the Provisional IRA, one of the armed groups in Northern Ireland, and the IRA had killed 271 police in Northern Ireland and 12 outside Northern Ireland. So here's an organisation who were affiliated to the Provisional IRA sitting down on the policing board with politicians, civic society and others to make sure the police were accountable. Now, I found it difficult being on the policing board, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the people on it was someone who actually bombed the judiciary in London, as an example. And people in my community were saying to me, why are you sitting with the bomber who bombed the Old Bailey in London? It was difficult, but we held through. And to be honest, some of those people who ex-prisoners, they were the most progressive, positive people on that, along with others. Because they had went in, they'd rejected the violence themselves, stopped the violence, and they went in to politics. And up to this point, Sinn Féin had refused to recognise the police, both the RUC and the police service, the new police service, and they did. Let me just conclude with another couple of things very quickly. How long have I got? 2 minutes? About 2 minutes. I suppose the first thing is I want to mention as well, in terms of accountability of the police, we have a police ombudsman. Sometimes it's a woman as well, but they call it ombudsman. And rather than the police investigate complaints against themselves, which was the case, we now have an ombudsman who investigates complaints against officers. And it's in two areas. One, current, where they would investigate the last 12 months, but interesting enough, they can investigate, you had mentioned 1968, they can investigate crimes or murders or whatever, come right back. And let me just finish with this last story, I promise you. And it's an encouraging thing. And for me, this is a great example of people who were involved in a conflict, and a good example of reconciliation. In 1993, the IRA left a bomb in a Protestant part of Belfast. The bomber was killed, went off prematurely, and 8 innocent Protestant people were killed. This August, there was a play about a mother's pain. She lost her young daughter. And this play was part of the West Belfast Festival in the heart of republicanism, where the IRA had the biggest support in Northern Ireland. And I felt a bit afraid going up. I thought, what's the response going to be? I was nervous. The play, when it finished, brought a standing ovation from every person in that room. And there were people from Republicans who had lost loved ones, people from Loyalists who were hugging each other, because their pain was the same. If you have a son who's been killed, or a mother's bombed, or whatever. And I thought, that's the peace process working. So thanks for inviting me, and I'll just conclude that. Thank you very much.